Okay, thank you all, and please, speakers, the stage is yours.
All right, let's get this party started. It's good to see everyone. A lot of familiar faces from throughout the week. So just as a note, we want the session to be as interactive as possible in terms of asking questions and whatnot. We're going to first walk you guys through a little bit of our own personal experiences with engaging in different on-campus and online opportunities, because we think case studies are a great way to kind of share reflections. Oh, my shoulder's disappearing there, which is interesting. And of course, we're going to talk about some takeaways and some best tips, best practices for navigating ways to get involved with different opportunities in high school, at the college level, at the graduate level, graduate school level. So the chat is open, the chat is yours. Feel free to share any questions in there. And we will keep an eye on that. If there's anything very relevant to the current topic at the moment, we'll incorporate those questions in, or we can have our very fun Q&A at the end. So we have Ivy, Amari, and myself here today. Myself, I gave some wonderful introductions, and we can pass it over to Ivy to start off.
Hi, everyone. Considering I'm currently in high school, as Salvi said, I do the IB program. So I'll be walking you through a high school level of on and off campus opportunities. And I'll start with my experience in the New York Academy of Science, where I was a member of both the Junior Academy and 1000 Girls, 1000 Futures from 2022 to 2023. So this program has actually been one of the most insightful places I've been. In fact, I got to connect with so many mentors. I got to learn a lot of current affairs in science, which I did not deem possible, especially in school. And so once you connect with such opportunities, you get to deal with science or whatever area of interest at a global level. The applications are usually open during summer. They actually closed on July 6th. And it brings together so many students from all over the world. And during this program, I got recognized for outstanding performance for the 1000 Girls, 1000 Futures module, which was one of my biggest honors. Next slide, please. The next opportunity I'll talk about is Rise for the World. I'm 17, so this was my first and last year of applying. And I only found out about it when it was about, let's say, 20 days to the deadline. And it was actually one of the most fun things I've ever done. So I actually got an idea for my project through New York Academy of Science, where we were taught about science communication to the public and bridging that gap, which is what my project was about. This project managed to make me a finalist, where 500 finalists are chosen out of about 80,000 applications. And so it involves carrying out a 100-day project. You demonstrate brilliance in all forms. I think it's the most inclusive kind of opportunity I've seen. Rise offers lifelong scholarships. So you may get an opportunity to get to join university on a need-based level, of course. And there are usually technology packages and lifelong opportunities with mentors and networking, etc. The Anchor program is over $1 billion commitment by Eric and Wendy Schmidt to fund and support global talent. In the end, they pick 100 global winners from the 500 finalists. On the right, you can see my certificate. So while I've had these online opportunities, Women in Action is one of my in-person opportunities. In fact, sometimes you say that there's no place of interest or there's no club in school that kind of supports your interest. One thing you can always do is start your own club. So Women in Action, I started off as a writer for the main branch, which was started by my friend. My friend founded it from New York Academy of Science. And she invited me to the team, and it was a very exciting opportunity to advocate for equity and level the playing field for all genders. And so I got an idea to start my own branch in Kenya, the regional chapter. And it had been an amazing program because I have gotten to carry out book drives. We started another project called Project Period Poverty, which was to get accessible sanitary towels for girls around Kenya, as well as a book drive, which was to bridge the gap between scientists, or rather people who communicate anything about science, and those who are illiterate. Yeah, so this was both virtual and in person. And as there are a lot of opportunities or a lot of clubs you can start on your own to expand your knowledge, to even enhance your profile, so much to do on your own. You can always take the initiative and you can have an amazing club. Lastly, I'm going to talk about Inspirit AI. This was a summer program I did this year, and I joined by connection with a friend. And while this program is $1,100 to be a part of, I got a scholarship, and I got to do a passion project in AI, which was AI and healthcare. So we built an AI software which detects pneumonia from chest x-rays. This was extremely fun because I have never done coding all my life. And it was the most inclusive program ever because there's beginner level, intermediate level, advanced level. And so being a beginner, I started from the very basics. And they take about 25 hours. Yeah, it's 25 hours of commitment, which they split into 2-hour sessions or 2.5-hour sessions throughout a span of 2 weeks. So this was absolutely fun for me because I learned something new, and I actually demonstrated interest in my field of choice for my career, which is in the medical side. So I think I will pass it on to Amari.
Oh, it looks like my slides are newer next. So I can hop in. Oh, we have some questions that actually just came in. Ivy, could you maybe talk a little bit more about how you were able to receive that scholarship within Spirit AI?
Yes. Okay. So one thing that I did was the cold emailing. So I directly emailed the program manager to tell him that the fees were especially high. Kenya has had a very bad economic state. And so I just explained my point of view to the program manager. And so in the end, my twin brother and I actually managed to join on a scholarship because there's really no way my family is going to be able to cover both $1,100 for each of us. And so emailing is always a good start. And then afterwards, you can now have an interview where they can get to know more about you and get a holistic perspective of where you're coming from. And therefore, you're going to get your opportunities. Any other question? Let me see.
I think the others are general, so we can probably move back towards the end and also seeing time.
Okay.
All right, so moving on, I'm going to be telling you first a little bit about Columbia Synapse, which is a group that was on campus and started out in person, moved online due to COVID, and then came back in person. So this was all based in New York City. I joined in my first year of college as an undergrad as a part of the events committee member. As you can tell, events are really great. We're here at an event. And events in the in-person community, especially pre-COVID, we were really passionate about connecting with folks in the New York City area who perhaps were brain injury survivors themselves, or who are passionate about using neuroscience to improve clinical outcomes for patients, raise awareness, raise advocacy of invisible disabilities, basically. So as part of the events team, there were two main streams that we were organizing. One was research, like this, the Resilient Brain Research Landscape photo you can see here. That was my first ever in-person event. And also more on the awareness end, kind of fostering conversations, social and networking events to build connections among like-minded folks on campus. And so I joined this opportunity through an application process. Most colleges you will see they have extensive activity fairs. And there's a couple of weeks at the start of semesters where all clubs are recruiting for new members. And after serving for, I think, about a semester and a half, I was promoted to the cabinet position, so moving into the vice president role. And within a lot of these on-campus organizations at colleges, you will see that there's a wide variety of freshmen through senior representation from first through fourth year. So oftentimes you start out as a first year, second year, you may feel like you're just on the general volunteering level, not really in leadership quite yet. There's nothing to worry about, because as you stay involved over time, there are plenty of leadership opportunities to kind of really get more involved. So I will say I wanted to put this up here because I think sometimes participating in these kinds of extracurriculars can seem very secondary to classes and getting our degree. But I can say that I think participating in Synapse was hands down one of the top 3 experiences for what cemented neuroscience and my interest in stroke and brain injury. So it definitely changed, I think, the trajectory of what I see for the next few years, few decades to come. And that was just through all the exposure from these kinds of speaker events and the people and the peers connecting with. Another project, this is one a little bit backtracking to when I was in high school. This was entirely in person as well. And how I heard about the Alive Inside project was I used to volunteer with my community's local senior center. And a lot of these seniors there had dementia and Alzheimer's. And so some partner organizations in the area thought, well, we know that there is a lot of information out there about the connection between neuroscience and the impact of music on bringing back memories and kind of helping to stimulate individuals who have dementia. Music truly is a powerful connection. And so this project was aiming to create headsets and playlists with customized music from seniors in the community. So we would interview them, learn more about their childhood, their younger days, and then build these kind of music sets for them to listen to through these headsets, whether they were at home, under private care, or at these different senior care facilities. So I think this was a really valuable experience for being able to see the impact of these kind of conditions on people's lives in person, and of course, see the impact of music on promoting wellness for folks. One of the most poignant memories for me from, I think, late high school was I had met a researcher who was working on Alzheimer's disease, but they had never actually met someone with Alzheimer's themselves. So I think in this case, this opportunity still is very near and dear to my heart, because I think as neuroscientists and aspiring neuroscientists, it's super important to connect with the people that we hope to help and serve, and to understand the true lived experience is super important. Yes, and Alive Inside is still an organization you can join. I believe that if you go to their Alive Inside project website, there's a Get Involved tab. They're very friendly and welcoming to youth as well. And there's different efforts around the US, I believe international as well, but might need to double check that. And then this is a little bit of high school continuing into college and grad school a little bit too, is this wonderful group called 500 Women Scientists. Kind of on the note of Ivy mentioned starting the student group locally, I had started out with creating this club at my high school as a Women in STEM centered group, a community, and that picture on the bottom left is a group of me and some of my friends from that time, who are all in college and beyond now. And the mission of this organization at the end of the day is to really be a voice for advocating for different gaps in the field, different needs that women and gender minorities may experience. And so that took place through organizing on a grassroots level in person, but also online, because this was an international community we're talking about. So the way that I moved from kind of leading this high school chapter to serving on leadership of the organization was through connecting with one of the co-founders and saying, hey, probably don't know me, but I had started this high school group and I truly really admired the work they were doing, because this is spanning like tens of thousands of people across the globe. I was like, I just love to stay in touch. And I think they were really just really awesomely welcoming and really happy to see younger folks be involved and see the early career face of the organization grow. So they reached out to do a spotlight of what we were doing locally as high school students. And then I moved on to kind of help out more deeply with youth outreach and social media efforts as well, and building this database called Gauge, which is aiming to increase the visibility of women scientists and preventing things like manels, which are panels full of only men speakers, from happening, by saying, hey, there are plenty of women and gender minority experts out there to draw from their expertise. So that was kind of a little bit of, I had started something, but then it was through being in touch with different people that I was able to also kind of elevate that and get more involved. And then lastly, I wanted to talk really briefly about Pandemos, which was a very, very COVID-19 centered in the pandemic kind of a project. It was a team of about, I would say max of 10 students, mostly from Canada, and I was in the US. We were all working online during that time to really keep up with the bunch of COVID-19 news that was always changing. I mean, we saw updates coming out every day that were different. And so it was kind of a really on the spot exercise of, there's all this scientific literature that's out there. There's all these big over exaggerated, often news articles out there. How do we really synthesize all these developments in an easily understandable manner and then disseminate them effectively? So I served in kind of a writing capacity and an editing capacity, and we would focus on different kinds of more Q&A, kind of reader submit questions format, to summarizing research, to commenting on what kind of different policy restrictions and whatnot they were there. So the reason I put this there as kind of like thinking, what the heck does this have to do with neuroscience? And I think with the note of advocacy as well from earlier is that it's really important to know what good science is. There was a case just earlier, I think today or yesterday, that broke about a really famed I don't know if they're neuroscientists, but a really famed scientist who is resigning from a position because there were some flaws spotted in their research from years past. Really, the importance of good science is really, really, it's important. I've said that like 3 times, but it is super crucial to get experience with understanding how do you kind of really critically review existing literature out there, and how do you talk about science in a non-jargony way? Because COVID-19, I think, showed us that there were a lot of gaps in the way that we communicate with the public, and really in this opportunity, being able to get involved in a more hands-on manner, dive down, do the work myself and put that time into it, kind of gave me a perspective on the challenges that science communicators had to face during that time and even into now. And we know that neuroscience is also one of those fields, similar to public health, that has a lot of evolving information, neurotech and AI and all these different things going on. So I think this one has concluded. We kind of wrapped up, I want to say around 2021, but a really valuable opportunity to kind of take a deeper dive into literature, synthesize, and collaborate with like-minded peers as well. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Amari.
Hi, everyone. So I'm an undergrad at Stanford, so most of these opportunities are kind of Stanford related, but you could also apply it to where maybe you go to university, or even if you're in high school, when it comes to taking the initiative and making the most out of the opportunities presented to you. So first, I want to talk about Stanford Women in Medicine. I joined when I was a freshman, and that was through an application. And I was an intern, and I was an intern on the events committee, which is, events are great. Like, we come to this event and it's really fun and you get a lot out of it. After being an intern for almost a year, I'd say, I was then promoted to the director of professional development, which is where we were able to gather resources for undergrads when it comes to building a LinkedIn profile, resume building, panels on how to connect with other people in the field, whether that being researchers, or if you wanted to go into medicine, being a doctor. There were even some veterinarians that we had as well. And then this past year, I became co-secretary, which was more administrative work, but I still loved it. All of this is through an application process, and it's a pre-medical group. And even though it's not necessarily neuroscience, it's actually what allowed for me to open the door to other opportunities in my life, which would next be, you can move on to the next slide, Stanford University Minority Medical Alliance Conference. So this is something that I had absolutely no idea about until my freshman year when I joined Stanford Women in Medicine, and they wanted us to do a final project. And we had to do an intern project. So I said, okay, well, I want to do an intern project that has to do with obviously the theme of Stanford Women in Medicine. So I decided I wanted to host a panel. And at first I thought it was going to be something really small that would probably be just within the group, and maybe a couple other members of the Stanford community would come. But after cold emailing a couple people, I actually ended up being a part of this huge Stanford conference that's hosted through the Office of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion. And through there, I was able to host the panel Unplugged, an honest conversation with underrepresented women in medicine, which happens annually now. So just goes to show you that you can be a freshman in college with absolutely no experience in hosting panels, talking, public speaking, and have a small idea that turned into something major, and you can talk about something you love. I've had the opportunity to talk to female neurosurgeons, cardiothoracic surgeons, neurologists, OBGYNs, PAs, nurse practitioners, and just hear their experience on what it's like to build a family and being a woman in medicine, and what that means for your work-life balance, hardships in terms of the gender wage gap. So I've had a lot of good talks with different people, and that's allowed me to connect with people from all over the world that I still talk to, audience members that I was able to connect with on LinkedIn. And that all just started from taking the resources I had at Stanford and branching out and doing something that I was passionate about. So that is a little bit about the Stanford University Minority Medical Alliance Conference, and I hope you register for it. It happens every year. Please come. It's really fun. Yeah, you can move on. So yes, the Keller Laboratory at Stanford. So I know that someone in the chat asked a little bit about research, and we can circle back to that at the end. But just to talk about research, I got into research at Stanford, starting with the Stanford BioX program. And most universities will have undergraduate summer research programs where they give you grants in order to study over the summer as a researcher in a lab, whether that being a wet lab or a dry lab work. And you'll come over the summer and have a mentor, and you'll learn lots of good skills like reading scientific papers. How do I read, understand, and then communicate what I understand to other people with what I'm reading? Along with that, there were things like journal club, skill sessions, so simple skills such as like pipetting. How do I take 50 milliliters and pipette it into another tube? So I was an undergraduate research assistant in a lab that worked with acute myeloid leukemia, which is the Ron Carollo lab at Stanford. That's the BioX program that I did. And that introduced me to wet lab work. And then once I realized that neuroscience is what I was truly interested in, I applied to work for the Keller Laboratory at Stanford, which focuses on personalized neurotherapeutics and optimizing transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is used for people with depression, PTSD, and now they're also doing work with anxiety and a couple of other things to see if different frequencies work for different portions of the brain. So that's a little bit about the research aspect. And if you have any other questions on that, we can circle back towards the end. And then I think this is my last slide. So leadership education for aspiring physicians. This is a Stanford-based program that is open to other people in the California community. So you don't have to go to Stanford, just be in the surrounding area, because it was hybrid for a while, remote during COVID, and now they're trying to bring it back in person. So this is a program that introduced me to the ethical side of medicine as well as the interpersonal side. So when it comes to social determinants of public health, when it comes to learning about race in medicine and why there is a certain distrust with certain races in medicine, like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. So that's like one thing that we learned about. On top of the social determinants of health and equity, we were able to have these discussions weekly and projects where we would work amongst ourselves to figure out within our individual communities, what can we do to educate the public on certain public health issues that we were interested in. So I was particularly interested in the social determinants of health in my community. And so what I was able to do was contact the Board of Health in my community and work with the director to come up with a PowerPoint presentation that was digestible to high school students so that they could understand the social determinants of health in their community, whether that comes to being insured versus not being insured, when it comes to pollution, whether it comes to homes being near certain carcinogenic factors or areas. So we were able to have those talks with high school students and actually pique their interest so that they can come up with their own personal projects and not rely on high school clubs where they can take their own experiments and go out into the real world and say, okay, well, this is something I'm interested in. I'm interested in seeing how insurance affects the health or death rate in my community, and how can I read the literature and analyze the data and come up with a report for my community so that we can prevent easily preventable public health issues. So that was from 2020 to 2021, but most of the times when you join something like this, which is usually offered through most universities' Office of Diversity, or there's some Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, usually within a school's medical school, or if not the medical school, an undergraduate school, it becomes a part of you really, and you can then become a part of this community where I usually come back and I give talks to the next class of leadership education for aspiring physician participants. And so that has been a big part of my undergraduate journey in creating community and using that opportunity to help my own community. So yeah, I'll leave it there, and I guess we can start with the Q&A.
Okay, it's time for the Q&A, everyone. Keep the questions coming. And for our first question, we have from Nithya. Did I pronounce it right? When emailing college professors about research projects, which college professors should you email our local colleges or the ones you want to get into?
Straight up can say that okay, this is going to sound a little bit cynical, but let's say you manifest and you successfully get a position at your dream college with a laboratory and a professor there, does not guarantee that you are going to get into that college, because things have gotten really competitive these days. It definitely shows demonstrated interest, but I don't think that should be your sole factor for deciding what kind of labs to get involved with. You may find that a lab that has a perfect niche for what you want to do is at your local state college, for example. And so I think at the end of the day, when you get to college and perhaps you want to continue that research in that specific line, you have that perfect segue, and the institution name does not really matter. There was kind of a similar question yesterday in the undergrad student panel where we were talking about, does pre-college program participation really kind of maximize your chances? And the answer is really vague. Unfortunately, some of them are kind of money grab things and they're very expensive, unfortunately. The biggest thing is just to show your demonstrated interest in whatever kind of welcoming lab you can find. Sometimes the labs that publish the most aren't always the greatest for making you feel supported.
Yeah, also to add to that, if there's a lab at a different university that you really admire their work and you dream of working there. I had a researcher at Harvard that I really loved her work, and I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to cold email her. Let's just see if she'll respond. She's super busy, super famous, and she actually did respond, and pretty quickly too. So just reach out. Like, I know it might be scary at first, but reach out. And usually most universities do have grants, especially for the summer when it comes to visiting scholars. So see if maybe you can have a summer position at that university. Maybe it might not be full-time or like throughout the year, but reach out and hopefully they have some money somewhere that can help you come to the school and perform some research. So yeah, just to add to that.
There are also a lot of work study positions now opening up for a lot of undergrads for research positions. So if that's something you're considering with financial aid packages and work study agreements, you can keep an eye out for those kind of opportunities as well.
Okay, thank you all so much. We have a couple of questions from Isha, although I think the one about Inspired AI is answered already. Am I correct? Yeah, and the next one is Alive Inside still an organization you can still join? Is that answered already?
Yeah,
Okay.
we answered already too.
Yeah, for those questions again. Okay, and then from Saket, it's a brilliant initiative, and then it is wonder, or like the question involves wondering if this project was laser focused only for dementia patients, or had it also been covered patients for trauma healing like PTSD, CPTSD.
I think from what I remember in the designated mission, it was more of a focus for dementia and Alzheimer's patients. But I think the overall kind of on the ground level, when you were actually connecting with these seniors as like quote unquote clients to work with in these headsets, I think it was more so like who would most benefit from these. And sometimes, for different mental health conditions, some of these seniors had intersecting health conditions. And so we were kind of just seeing how much bandwidth did we have, how many seniors were interested, and then working on headsets from them accordingly. But I don't know, maybe the mission has changed in recent years. We're about like 3-4 years away from then. As time flies.
Okay, moving on. If you two would like to answer also this question, has been wonderfully answered by Ivy. Where and how can you find these programs and online opportunities for high schoolers?
Ivy typed out like an amazing response in there. I'm gonna totally do a little plug here, but y'all remember that 1,000 opportunities database from earlier this year? A lot of those programs are gonna renew for next year, and we'll keep an eye on those and we'll update that accordingly, of course, and you'll hear about it. But a vast majority of them will start recruiting for formal summer internships for high school students and for a lot of college students in the fall, which I know fall is a weird term schedule wise, but that means around November, December, going on into January, February. So that is a really great spot to start looking because it's 1,000 opportunities. So there's hopefully something in for you. And with a lot of these formal research programs, what's nice for high school students is you don't have to worry about as much of legalities, because if you're a minor, there's some kind of gray areas that you may have to deal with if you are doing independent research. And with these formal programs, there's also the advantage of kind of, you get the walkthrough from start to finish of the basics of scientific research, learning procedures, lectures from speakers. You have a cohort with you, which is really nice for building community. And then you kind of usually wrap out the summer with a nice capstone. Does not mean that throughout the year internships are a bad idea. They're wonderful. It's just this may maximize your chances for a lot of those formal summer programs because professors get a lot of inquiries. So sometimes, like Amari mentioned, that professor from Harvard thankfully reached back out. Sometimes it's a stroke of luck, depending on how much space they have. And unfortunately, sometimes you also kind of see that academic ladder where professors may be more likely to hire grad students, and then second preference is undergrad students, and then third preference is high school students. So do not be disappointed if you're not finding as much kind of success with cold emailing as you'd hoped. There's honestly, it's kind of like a lottery.
Okay, well, for the next one, we have from Jasmine. Hello, for the Stanford Women in STEM, can high schoolers join us?
Yeah, so for Stanford Women in Medicine, I don't believe you can join the actual club, but there is a high school mentorship committee. So we do work with high school students and have virtual events. So I can send the Instagram at and also probably the webpage in the chat, and feel free to reach out to them and see how you can join as a high school mentee.
Okay, we also have another one from Nidhi, or Nidhi, please correct me. Do this university/lab sponsor visa for summer internships for international students?
For in-person, it's pretty time intensive, and visas have gotten quite finicky. I've heard of, even for conferences and such, it's taken like 7-8 months to get approved. I think if you're an undergrad and a grad student, perhaps you might have a slightly higher chance, especially if it's one that you might continue with throughout the year, because if it's just for a summer, it's a very short amount of time. I will say, if you're looking for summer internships as an international student, I know of a friend who just traveled from India to California to do the SURF program, the Summer Undergrad Research Fellowship at Caltech. So I think you might have luck with kind of the formal named internships. And I know that our 1,000 Opportunities database is, I think, mostly biased towards a lot of US citizens and permanent residents, unfortunately. That is unfortunately the trend with a lot of those summer programs. But I will say that there are a lot of labs opening up remote internships now. And with remote internships, you don't need a visa, usually. So if it's kind of course, if it's a wet lab setting, that's a completely different story. You likely have to be in person, but if it's something more computational or of a dry lab setting, then online internships are a great avenue too. And I'm not sure if the international students panel earlier today discussed any of those topics for summer visas, but once the recording is posted over the weekend, would also suggest scrolling through there.
Okay, next one we have, how do you find the labs at different universities?
So when it comes to finding labs at universities, that's a very broad question because there are lots of different topics where you could research in. So I would say first figure out which department you're most interested in when it comes to research at that university. And then once you figure out which department you're interested in, I know it may be time consuming because most universities don't, when they put people or faculty, they don't put a description. They usually have to click on the profile and then click on another link, which takes you to their lab website. And then you read the mission statement and then on and on and on. But I would really say if you're interested in research and very passionate and want to commit to it to, let's say, the 4 years that undergrad may be, take the time to really go through all the profiles and figure out which lab you're really interested in terms of their research. Maybe skim over a couple of their publications. You don't have to read the full thing, just read the abstract, see if you're interested in it. And then I'd say reach out to a postdoc in the lab if the PI is busy and set up a Zoom call and just say, hey, I'm interested in your lab's work. Would you mind discussing with me a little bit about the projects that you do to see if I would be a good fit for the lab? So when it comes to labs, I'd say first go to the department pages. Then once you get to the departments, go through the faculty and see which faculty members' work interests you.
Okay, for the next one, in terms of opportunities and your studies, do you perhaps have any regrets for things you wish you could have done differently or better during your high school or undergrad years?
I mean, I'm still in high school, so I can't really say. But I do the IB program, and for those who know it, it's actually a very intensive program. There's research for every subject, and so it's kind of quite some heavy workload. But then aside from that, I chose to, without knowing, of course, but I chose to bombard myself with numerous opportunities, thinking that that IB would limit me. I wanted to be limitless. And yeah, this caused several burnouts. This is at the start of a new program, which is really unhealthy because when you start off on the wrong foot, you don't really go on great. And so something that I really, really advise is for you to focus on your specialty really. You may feel inclined to apply to as many opportunities as possible, but burnouts are real, burnouts are horrible, and you should prioritize your physical, mental, and emotional health first. That is something that I have really learned during high school. And going on forward, I think I'm doing so much better with learning how to manage my time, learning how to actually nitpick opportunities that fit in with my schedule and whatnot. So that is something I completely advise. Your mental health comes first.
Those are amazing points. And also the note of being really sure not to spread yourself too thin. It's much more valuable to be involved like really heavily in 3 different things than like somewhat involved in 8 different things. You end up forming better connections and gaining more in-depth kind of perspectives on the ones that you spend a lot of time with. And I would say something that I wish I'd realized is you will probably get rejected from a lot of things. And that's okay. Especially, I think one of the first things that I was really surprised by in college was that some student organizations are really competitive to get into. I think a lot of STEM and neuroscience groups, for example, and pre-med groups too, there's so many people who are interested in getting involved in these groups, and so it can be super competitive. Just because you don't get a named position does not mean that you're a failure. There are plenty of other ways to explore those kind of similar opportunities. So that would be my 2 cents there. Rejection is okay.
Yes, I'd also agree. Just always think of the phrase rejection is redirection. So don't take it as a failure, just take it as a window to a different opportunity. And I'd say I agree, like Ivy said, the one thing I kind of regret is pushing myself too hard in high school or following what I thought you were supposed to do. So for example, like, oh, like in order to get into a great school, you have to do mock trial, or you have to do speech and debate, or you have to do, there's no have to do anything. I'd say just be authentic to yourself and what your passions are and be creative with it. And yeah, prioritize your mental health. That is the main thing.
Yeah, a rejection email is never a measure of your self-worth. There's something else that's meant for you.
Thank you all so much for those amazing answers. I'm pretty sure our audience or members of the audience are pretty touched and can learn a lot from those. And then the next one, we have another question that is super appreciative of the 500 women in science. Although Isha is requesting to please restate how you were able to get so involved with it, because the mission really resonated with Isha, and they hope that maybe one day they could join in a similar capacity.
Yeah, so I started out from building a pod or a chapter that they call them pods at my local school, and connecting with a pod that was run by like adult scientists because we were a youth group. And so I would really bring in a lot of scientists from the area to share their expertise with us. And I would say this was 7 years ago. I feel ancient. And I know their policies have changed for kind of youth chapters in recent years. So I would say if we're kind of getting involved right now, there are plenty of amazing opportunities that they oftentimes amplify. We're kind of on a social media break for a few months because of some staff capacity changes, but sign up for the newsletter, right? Keep an eye on the social media channels. It is mostly still, I would say, folks who are kind of past the graduate school level and a little bit more established in their career, but the demographics are changing. So I would recommend signing up for the Women in Science database that I mentioned, Gauge. Put yourself out there as an aspiring scientist. And especially go check out that database. I'll put the link in there because there's like 15,000 women scientists in there, many of whom are open to being mentors. So great resource, I think, to really tap into.
Okay, for the next one, what is the recommended number of professors you should cold email to land a research position as a high schooler?
Y'all, don't be emailing like 200 labs, please. You'd also, you don't want to be emailing also like 10 different people simultaneously, because though, of course, you want to maximize your chances of getting a response, you probably are going to hear back from 2 or 3. And in that case, it's kind of awkward because you're like, what do I do now? So for numbers, start with the people who you most want to work with, like your dream, absolute dream. You start from there, you go maybe like follow up once or twice with these people, right? And slowly move down your list. So I don't know what that number is. When you are researching initially what labs you might be interested in, I would recommend maybe build a list up to like 20 groups, just so you know that you have done sufficient just background searching to know what groups are out there. But please don't define yourself by a number.
Something that Amari mentioned earlier was the importance of research, the background of this research labs and what they stand for. And I once found myself applying to one that I didn't really know much about. I just knew, this is locally actually, I just knew that these guys work on neuroscience and I was so excited. And so when I hear back and I'm getting to know the terms, the conditions and everything, yeah, I was taken aback. This is not what I signed up for. This is not what I thought it was. In fact, once I was hearing back is when I actually decided, let me talk to someone who's in the lab about, not in a senior position, someone who's actually working at the lab. Let me see the experience, because you can only know how well they work with the people who work below them. And yeah, I really, really wished I had done my research. Of course, you are always at liberty to say no, but don't put yourself in a place where you have to do that last minute research or you're panicking because this isn't what you thought it was. That background research is very, very important.
It's the same principle as like building your school list for colleges. If you get in there, would you be perfectly happy with going there? Same exact thing you want to shift over and translate to doing research on research labs as well.
Oh, I think someone raised their hand. Rashi?
Yeah, sorry, my chat isn't working. I just wanted to ask like each one of you, what do you think is the most important thing, or like not what stood out the most in your college application, but what do you think that like you did the most that is why you are where you are today, or like what college you went to?
Okay, I honestly sit down some days and I'm like, what exactly did my admissions reader think about my application? Some colleges apparently do, like you can look at your file afterwards. I don't think ours did, so that is a mystery for the rest of my life. I don't really think it's one activity. I know y'all probably hear those stories of like someone who won like the freaking Nobel Prize or whatever, and you're like, ah, that's probably why they got into college. But in reality, everyone probably has some really nice spikes of really high accomplishments in their profile. But at the end of the day, you got to be a decently well-rounded person. You have to have shown you have, decent academic progress, that you've been involved in different activities and not just pigeonhole yourself into one thing. And I think people also want to see that you have interests outside of your primary focus and your primary career aspirations. If 99.9% of all of the activities and experiences you've done ever in your life have been neuroscience related, I have some questions for you. Admire the passion, but it's really important to also showcase what do you do outside of your field, and also to showcase the why didn't you go in XYZ direction. Someone phrased this really well earlier today or yesterday, I can't remember, but it's like knowing what you don't want to do is just as important as proving what you want to do. So in interviews, for example, if those are still happening these days, people might ask you like, why do you want to study neuroscience? Why not like astrophysics or whatever? And having a little bit of that broad experience to tell people is super important. And a lot of times that kind of trial and error you can showcase in essays, because essays should hopefully not just be regurgitating your experiences, right? But like Amari and Ivy, for example, were sharing like, what did I kind of get out of this experience and how did it tie into a different one? Those are the kind of stories that people want to hear at the end of the day. So that was a long-winded answer, but it's really tough to tell like what was the most singular thing that could define any of our experiences, I think. And Ivy is probably very actively brainstorming essays right now.
One thing that I have gotten to learn, and actually I'm doing a lot of research on these universities right now, and there is so many mentions of a holistic approach to an application. So it is not just your extracurriculars. I have seen so many people with extraordinary extracurriculars that I sit down and wonder, I could have never done this myself, or how do you even start this? But your essays are taken into account of your grades as well. There's so much to look into when they are selecting a prospective student. And so, just like Chinmayi said, being well-rounded is very, very important. So you put decent amount of effort into all these sections and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I'd say for myself, the parts of my application that really made me stand out as an applicant was the writing. Like, you can have a resume and say, I was a Simply Neuroscience volunteer and I did this for 3 years and XYZ. And they'll just look at the application and say, okay, well, we also have John Doe who did Simply Neuroscience for 3 years too. What makes you special? So what makes you special is how you write about it and how you talk about what you gain from that experience. And I was grateful to get into Stanford, and I felt like that was such a great fit for me because not only were they asking about, colleges don't just ask about your resume, the academic experiences you have, the clubs you were in. They also ask you simple questions like, what's your favorite movie? Like, what books do you read? Like, they actually want to get to know you as a person. And I remember writing my personal statement, and it was about my journey with my mental health and what that was like for me. And I think the way that I described my own resilience was a great factor to add into your application. So when you're looking at your application, look at it as, how do I want to present myself to these universities? What are, let's say, 5 characteristics that I want them to gain from this application, and where am I lacking? So just look at it as a presentation, what you want them to gain from your application, and just make sure you're very descriptive about your experience, because you can say you volunteered at a hospital, but there's saying that, and then there's also saying, I volunteered at this hospital and I was able to witness a C-section and translate for mothers who speak primarily Spanish, and I love the experience because it enlivened me and it showed me that I really like the OR. Like, so it's more than just bullet pointing your accomplishments and more so describing what you got out of it. So if you have any like questions about writing and how to be very descriptive, I love writing, so please feel free to reach out to me when it comes to college applications and writing.
Okay, we have 6 to 7 remaining questions. I think we're capping it off at that. Any more additional inquiries, please don't hesitate to reach out to our amazing speakers. Okay, so for the next one, what's your best advice on managing so many extracurricular during the semester while prioritizing grades?
Yeah, I think this one was mentioned before. So many extracurriculars is a big red flag in that statement. From my point of view, yeah, you have to find what works for you best. You have to find the one that you're passionate about most. Don't do it for the sake. Do it because it gives you some sense of fulfillment. Do it because it aligns with your goals, your missions, and something that's personal to you, and not because it's there. So once now on your question of balance, it's really important for you to find maybe a timetable or see the specific days that you're going to be working on these extracurriculars, and your grades are overall coming on top. And so just always learn how to prioritize your grades first and then have a timetable for your additional section.
Okay, thank you. Please tell us if this has been answered already, but is it better to cold email professors for research positions or graduate/undergraduate/PhD students to take part in their research as high school students?
Try to do, I think Amari mentioned this earlier, postdocs and grad students will probably have better luck with, especially if it's someone who's a little bit further in their master's or PhD program because they've settled into a lab.
Yes, okay, thank you. So how about any internships during the fall? Do you have like any quick thoughts about it?
They're definitely out there. You usually just have to keep a closer eye on them because they're not disseminated as widely as summer internship programs. Twitter is a good spot.
Okay, thank you all. Okay, so for the next one, we have some questions about volunteering with Simply Neuroscience. I advise to email our Simply Neuroscience organization for your inquiries and future questions. Thank you for that. Okay, any more related questions to our talk for today? Okay, so there's this one question that asks about, did any of you study abroad? If so, can you talk like what the experience was like? Okay, no, thank you. That's a good question though. Okay, and I think the one about the science fair has been answered already in the chat. Yep, thank you, thank you. Okay, yep, I think we are good for today. Those were like a lot of amazing questions. Thank you to our audiences for being so enthusiastic and so engaged today. And again, if you have any additional questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to our amazing speakers. Okay, I will be stopping the recording now.